Hi, my name's Itali and in this video I'll be drawing a wolf for Kaz. This is a time-lapse video and therefore does contain fast-moving and flashing images. I'm starting with the background and building the mood for this one. It is meant to be deep in a forest with a little stream running through it, and the stream is sort of breaking up the shadow that the trees cast, so we've got a bit of light coming down where the stream is running, and the wolf will be just finishing a drink at the stream and sort of caught in the ray of lights. So because a lot of this was going to be background, I did decide to sort of think about the background quite a bit before putting the wolf in at all. And you'll see that I start off with this sort of wider shot with the stream being quite small in the image, and we've got the trees sort of disappearing off into the distance. But after speaking with Kaz about it, we do decide to do a more zoomed in version of this so that we can get more detail on the wolf, or the wolf is more center in the picture. So I'm just building up different elements as I go, and I did use a lot of what I learned from my background practice in this picture, so I'm thankful for that practice. But pretty much everything is on a different layer, and you'll see me working on the different layers throughout the video, as the background is what I've spent most of the time on. So I've got this water layer, and a rock layer, and a tree layer, and a leaf layer, and a moss layer. And at the moment, this is just sort of a rough sketch just to get the feel across. But once the sketch is approved and we sort of crop out some of the picture, then I start to detail the background in earnest and detailing the wolf, which you'll see me sketching in shortly. So here's wolf being sketched in, and I did do a very rough sketch to begin with and a very rough color. And when I return to coloring the wolf in earnest, you'll see that the shape changes quite a lot, as the only reference I was using at this stage was the reference images that Kaz had given me. But when I actually go to do the wolf properly, I do look up some actual reference images. You won't see them on screen. I just googled wolves on my phone, as I don't draw wolves very often. I mostly draw dragons, so I did need a little bit more help with getting the right shape. But I do find things without wings to be a little bit easier to draw than things that do have wings, and obviously because it's an animal that exists, finding references for them is pretty easy. And I have drawn wolves before, so it's not like it's completely new to me. The one thing I do struggle with, and I struggle with this with other creatures as well, is the feet. And you can see they're quite rough at the moment, but when I go to shade them in earnest, I do bring up on my phone some guides on how to draw paws, and I was quite happy with how my paws came out. I thought they ended up looking quite good, especially this one that you can see is lifted up off the ground at the moment. I tried to make sure that I pushed my shadows quite hard, since it's supposed to be in sort of fairly bright light, like stepping out from shadow into light. So it does need to have pretty harsh shadow falling across the parts of it that are not being hit by the light. So there's quite a lot of discoloration to the body color, and I guess if you actually teardropped parts of it, you would discover that where it looks like in your mind it looks like just shadowed white, it's actually like a weird gray green or something. But that's kind of what I love about shading this way, is like mixing all these colors together and figuring out what a reddish brown color would look like under the shadows of a tree and things like that. I just find this process really enjoyable of mixing the colors together, and I did really enjoy coloring this wolf. I did start with this fairly feathery, soft fur brush, but then I changed back to my normal bamboo brush to add more detail in, and I really like it. I really like how this paint style turned out, particularly on that paw, as I mentioned before, and just sort of like adding tufts and details in on top of my soft layering and mixing all these colors was really enjoyable, and it was like a nice refreshing change from drawing dragon-like creatures to draw a wolf. So I really appreciate the opportunity to draw this. So thank you very much, Kaz, for commissioning me to draw something other than dragons. Don't get me wrong, I love drawing dragons, but it is nice to have something to break up all those scales every now and then. I really love adding in reflected light or like a bounced light into things, and green is probably one of my favorite to do. Green and like really washed out blue are my two favorite colors to do bounced or reflected light on. I don't know, it's just something about it. Just when you add it onto a picture, it just makes it look so much more three-dimensional and just makes it pop out so much more. I just really love doing it. So if you haven't tried it before, I recommend doing bounce light or reflected light on your drawings, and just color it normally, and then at the last step just add a little bit of color from your background onto the underside of your picture and see how it looks. If you don't like it, just undo it, but I think you'll like it. Well, I'm moving on to the background again now, and as mentioned, I spent quite a long time on the background, and I'm using my knowledge from my practice with rocks on my practice picture, and I really have to fight my instincts on rocks. I love smudging in colors and mixing colors together, but when I do that on rocks, they just look like soggy bags. So I really fought my urges this time, and I made sure that I just did solid patches of color. And even when I was mixing in extra colors onto the rocks, I made sure that that extra color I mixed in was like one solid color on a face of the rock, not like sort of blurred in. Now I'm doing this really bright light against the trees. This is just sort of to remind myself where all the main trees are before I start going in and detailing them. So sort of like highlighting it with the light coming from the gap in the canopy. And I've gone back to using a really old brush of mine for the trees, which is this wood texture brush that I made a few years ago. And I'd forgotten how much I love using that brush for wood texture. And I think it is still in the video on how to make brushes, but it is basically just a photograph of a wood texture that I just made a brush out of. I did this little bit of water reflecting off the bottom of the fallen log, which I really liked. But then later on in the video, you'll see I've actually placed the wolf right along the edge of that fallen log, which is not great design. So I end up moving the wolf quite a few times to different positions so that it's not sort of like, it's the body shape is not following exactly another shape in the background, because it kind of makes it hard to tell what's going on in the background if you do that. So you see here, it's like totally obscured that water, and the line of the tree, like it kind of almost looks like the tree is on the back of the wolf, which is not great. So I do move the wolf a few times before I'm 100% happy with the placement of the wolf. Now moving on to the leaves, and I try not to overthink the leaves too much, because when I overwork them too much, they just end up looking more and more fake. And I'm trying to go for more like messy freestyle for the leaves, and then I sort of go back in afterwards and draw some individual leaves so that it actually looks like, I guess, leaves. And I was quite happy with how this came out. I certainly struggled less on foliage this time than I have in the past, and I thought they looked pretty good, especially like this bush I'm doing right now. I was pretty pleased with how this little bush came out, and these sort of like different shades of leaf color around the background. One new thing I've also started to do recently is sort of outline particular shapes in a lighter color, even though that's not necessarily something that happens normally. It does sort of, I guess, lead your eye to see the shapes rather than not seeing them. I do overdo it a little bit in the leaves, I think, and I start pulling myself back from that. But later on, when I'm finishing up the wolf, you'll see I do add like a white edge to particular parts of the wolf, just so that they stand out from the background and the rest of the wolf, to sort of give them a little bit more of a pop. And I know that's not very realistic, but this is not a very realistic picture, let's be honest. It's an artist's impression of something, and I think it looks nice and appealing, and that's why I did it. Now I've moved on to the moss. There's a lot of moss in this picture, it turns out, a lot of moss. And I'm just using my textured sort of rocky brush for this. And this is another brush I made a long time ago and I still super love. And it's particularly good for making this sort of textured moss thing happening here. And I do think the moss kind of ties in a lot of this picture. I think before the moss, it kind of was just like bits and pieces, but now it's sort of like, you know, tying the trees into the rocks and bringing all the colors together. And I do some adjustments to, I guess, the distance colors, sort of washing out the colors a little bit as they fade into the background. And now returning to the rocks, and again resisting my urge to blur colors in. I do end up adding a bit of texture to them though, so I just have a very large texture brush and I just touch on them a tiny bit, and then I start detailing them a bit, so adding little cracks and defining a few more of the different planes on the rocks, just to make them look more like rocks and less like blocks. And adding the details to the water, so adding the shadow cast from like the tree log and the rocks and the wolf, and mixing in the surrounding colors for the rest of the water, and deciding on how this wolf is going to be standing in the water and what I'm going to do with the foot and things like that, and adding the light that's shining down on the water that really makes the water, I think, like adding that little bit of light sparkle around the edge of like the rocks and stuff really makes it look like it's water. I did consider having a tongue poking out here, but I decided it looks kind of better without the tongue poking out, and that I would just do some little drops of water. Then add some spots of light coming down from the sort of shafts of light between the leaves of the canopy, and start doing the final stages of adjustments with the lighting and the little bits of rock and moss and things that will be in front of the wolf's feet. I add another shadow layer to the wolf because I don't think I've pushed the shadows far enough. But then I decided I've pushed them too far, and so I lighten the shadow up a little bit. But I think this level of shadow looks good. And I add the little drops of water, little droplets, which I really like doing. They're pretty easy to do, and they just sort of add something extra to the picture. And now you can see I've added that like white outline to parts of it. And I'm just doing some final color additions to areas that are darker or lighter, and then I'll be doing my final blur of the background. And this is it. This is the final image, and I really enjoyed doing this. So thank you again, Kaz. Thanks everybody for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and I also have a Patreon if you'd like to support me. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!